You go. So if you don't want to appear on the recording, just remember to switch off your camera. In addition, if you are wondering how you can unmute yourself or use the chat function, we have disabled those elements for our webinar, but that doesn't mean we are not looking forward to your questions. This is why we are using Slido today. So we really invite you to just go on Slido and use the pattern check, or to do it the easy way, which is to scan the QR code. And then you can do that throughout the entire webinar. You can ask your questions, and it will be our pleasure to answer them. As a small reminder, please stay at the general level with your questions, and it's simply because we cannot dive into the details of your applications during this webinar. And yeah, that's actually it for the technicalities, so we can move on.
Very good. Then also a warm welcome from my side. Marie has introduced me. My name is Jenny, and we will dive right into the next slide. And the next slide has the objective of today. Let's just see how we get to the next slide.
We have a Moody computer.
Moody computer. There we go. This is the objective of today. So why are we here today? It's fairly easy. We can see that the applications have very much improved when it comes to making use of the indicators and hence also the intervention logic. However, we can see some mistakes that are coming up again and again. And we want to share today some pitfalls with you. So this webinar is meant as your last check before you submit your application form in call 3 to our program, the North Sea program. After this webinar, you will be aware of the main pitfalls we have, not we have, but the intervention logic has actually. You will be able to identify them in your own application form. And most importantly, you will be able to submit an application form without all of the mistakes. Before we dive into the content of these pitfalls, what do we have to offer today, Marie?
Well, I think we have quite many things to offer, at least we hope so. This is why we're going to have a look at our agenda, if the computer allows us. Yeah. So as you can see, again, you have the Slido passcode, a QR code, if you didn't get the chance to join this platform when we started the webinar. So the agenda for today, we start with the what. Main question, what are we going to talk about today? And this is not a surprise, I believe. It's going to be about the intervention logic and indicators. But this first part of the webinar is really meant as a short introduction to present you with the different building blocks. Then we're going to move on to the how. So how should the indicators be applied in order to create a correct and good intervention logic? So for that, we present you different pitfalls, underlined with examples, and of course, some explanations. Most of the examples you're going to see today, they're actually been taken from a submitted application, and we got the approval, of course, of the applicants to share them with you today. So it's not something we came up with, it's really like hands-on. And then we will finish with the who. Who should be applying the indicators? Here again, pretty straightforward answer. This is you. And this is why we have decided to allocate quite a few minutes for you at the end of this webinar, for you to ask your questions and for us to be able to answer them. And we will do that with Slido. Small reminder again, make sure to stay general and to don't ask questions very specific to your application. So this is our little agenda for the next 45 minutes, let's say.
Let's dive right into the what. And as Marie has mentioned, the what is, of course, the intervention logic and indicators. And I remember that back then, someone has referred to the intervention logic as the red thread that you have in your intervention, in your application form. The red thread actually starts with the project. Oh no, what did I do?
All good.
So the red thread starts with the project overall objective. What is the project overall objective? The project overall objective is your overall aim, what you want to achieve with your project. You can achieve the project overall objective by carrying out different work packages. In this case, we have 3. This is an example of a regular project. Of course, if you have a small scale project, then you only have 1 work package. The work packages, they always consist of 1 work package objective, and the work package objective describes the goal of your work package. And then we are already at the heart of your work package, and those are the activities and deliverables. And you need to have the activities in order to achieve the work package objective. As a logical consequence from having carried out these activities, you reach the outputs on work package level, and all of the explained will then lead to the results. And the results are the accumulated benefits of having delivered your whole project. Can it be the case that we have another person waiting in the waiting room, Marie? No. Okay.
All good.
All good. So this is your intervention logic of your project. And as you have heard from my intervention, everything is interlinked by the red thread. However, for the purpose of this webinar, Marie and I have tried to simplify that everything is connected. So we have identified pitfalls on different levels. So we have grouped the mistakes that we have found. So in the end, we now have pitfalls on activity deliverable level, pitfalls on output level, and pitfalls on result level. And I think with that being said, we can dive into the first level, the activity deliverable level.
Exactly. So as Jenny said, we will go through the 3 levels step by step. So we will show you examples of bad practices. We will provide explanations for all of them. And of course, we will give you some guidance on what you should focus on. So let's just start with the first level, which is activities and deliverables. And here we have our first example. So we start with an activity that is a pilot evaluation. And you can see from the description that this activity will be on a report to analyze the different insights the applicants got from the 3 pilots that will be implemented in their projects. However, when we look at the deliverable that has been chosen, we can see this is data collection activity. So here we are at our first mistake. This mistake is the fact that the description of the activity, in that case, it's indicated a report, doesn't match with the chosen deliverable, which is a data collection activity. So in order for this activity to be correct, the deliverable report should have been chosen instead of data collection activity. So it's very important that when you're working on your application and then when you go through the drop-down menu and you need to select your deliverable, that what you are choosing is actually aligned with what you're describing in your activity. Mm-hmm. It's also important to take into consideration that this type of mismatch is also something we see on another level, which is the output level. And here to give you an example, sometimes we can have a pilot being selected, but then when we are reading the description of the pilot, we realize it actually looks more like a strategy or an action plan. And the same is also being done sometimes with a strategy and action plan. When we are looking at them, we're like, no, this is actually more a pilot. So here, remember to be coherent between your description and what you're selecting as a delivery.
Thank you very much, Marie.
You're welcome.
It makes good sense to me. And now that we have learned that the description needs to be in line with the deliverable chosen, we go even one step further And that is to say that also the target, of course, needs to match and be in line with the description and the deliverable. And I have an example for you from an actual project. You can see here on the screen that this project has decided to have an activity called Problem Discovery Workshops. In the description, they are talking about 1 or 2 transnational hybrid workshops. And as the target chosen on the right side, they have the 2. Even though this is a very soft example of this kind of mistake, we can conclude here that the target chosen does not match entirely with the description, because the description is talking about 1 or 2 workshops, whereas the target is 2. It's not coherent enough. When checking your application forms again, make sure that you have a clear link between the description and the chosen target. So what would have been entirely correct here? It would have been correct if the project would have said in the description 2 transnational hybrid workshops with a target of 2. And I hope that was clear. Those were the first pitfalls, I guess, on activity deliverable level.
Exactly.
Is there more, Marie?
Yes, indeed, there is more. Fortunately or unfortunately, you can be the judge of that. So here, the other example, and you can see it as well as what is wrong. So we're just gonna go through it calmly. We can see that this activity is partner meetings, which is fine. However, when we are looking at the description, we understand from it that those partner meetings that actually have the objective to discuss the general project progress, how is it going with the delivery and the quality assurance. From this description, we can actually see that those partner meetings, they are not work package related, but they are relevant for the entire, your entire project. So here it means that those meetings, they actually do not contribute to your work package objective. And this is incorrect. This is why this type of activities shouldn't be listed in your list of activities.
Good point, but I can see in several cases that projects have partner meetings, internal ones. Where do they then put them, if not here?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's actually quite easy to answer. When you're working on your full application, there is a section C7 on project management, and here you can provide this type of information if you want to. You should just be aware that the setup of this section is slightly different from how you enter information in your work package. And it's because it's plain text. So you will just have to write, let's say, more sentences, indicate the number of meetings if you want to in a slightly different manner.
Yeah. So let's assume there's a project that is planning to have a kickoff meeting, and as in your example, 6 internal partner meetings, then this is what they put in writing into this C7 box.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also maybe as a small reminder, if you're working on an expression of interest, this type of information on internal meetings, kickoff and such, you actually don't have to provide them yet. And it's simply because the section C7 on project management is not included in the expression of interest application form.
So only full application,
if you wish to do so. Yeah.
Very clear to me, Marie.
Good.
We can move on, I think, to the next one. And the slide is blank. That's on purpose, because we are now going to touch upon something that we haven't mentioned before. And that is because the intervention logic also has an element that is connected to communication. Because each work package must have a communication objective. I have an example for you from, it's a bad example actually, but we have the approval from the applicant to use it here. So this is the text box for the communication objective. It states here communication objectives, actually, because you can have more than one, and target audience. And what the project has put in here reads as follows. Platform and roadmap data input supported and validated by external advisory board members, such as energy suppliers, users, and project partners. Well, we have to say that this description is, first of all, very short, and hence it's also very difficult to understand what the project envisions with it. So to summarize, the communication objective presented here is very weak and also could be understood as an activity, at least parts of it. So when we, for example, look at the platform or the roadmap, keep in mind that activities from the work package should not necessarily be repeated in your communication objective. However, now the question is, what is a communication objective then? And a communication objective is basically stating what you want to achieve in connection with communication in that respective work package. And that, of course, includes how you are going to engage with the relevant target groups. Now we turn to the green box, which states that the communication objective should be clearly linked to the work package objective. So similar to the work package objective, the communication objective is a vision of what you want to do with, in this case, communication in that respective work package. I hope that was clear. If not, please feel free to put in your question into Slido.
Thank you, Jenny.
Welcome.
And here we are already at our last example for the activity deliverable level. So let's just start with it. It's a very common error we see, and it's what we call the double counting of an activity and output. And we really wanted to focus on that today because it's actually a mistake that we've seen in the majority of the submitted application. So we thought it could be nice to spend a bit of time on it. But let's just look at the example. We're not going through the description here, but let's just focus on the title. So if we look at the blue box, we can see that a pilot implementation is included in the list of activities in this application. If you look at the yellow box, the same type of information, it's still pilot implementation. It's also being included in the list of outputs. This is what we call the double counting error. The same information shouldn't be appearing 2 times different places in your application. So that's the first element. Then there's something else to remember here is that a pilot implementation is always an activity, an output, always an output and never an activity. It doesn't mean that you cannot list activities related to your pilot. So that can be, for instance, everything that should be done before. We have examples here of preparatory work, data collection activities. You can also decide to maybe focus on the evaluation of your pilot after it's being implemented. So all this type of activities, everything that is before your pilot implementation or after, can be listed in your list of activities, but the pilot implementation in itself should be listed and described in your list of outputs only. Yeah. And you can see here already, like many things are already related. We are already going through different levels with this example. So we focus there more on the activity deliverable part, but you can also see like it's also touching upon the output level.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have this red thread that Jamie explained and showed with a physical example.
Yes, I think really good. So keep in mind to not make this mistake. If you have questions about it, put it into Slido. And to be honest, I think this was a lot of information for our participants. However, I think you can have a short break because I want to explain now, before we move on, why we've decided to come up with the webinar in the way it is. So we have decided to have one pitfall per slide so that you have the chance to go back to this presentation after the webinar, check them one by one, and make sure that these mistakes at least are not occurring in your application forms. So we really hope that it will help you. And now we have good news for you, because as Marie has said, we have mentioned all pitfalls in connection with activities deliverables. We now have 2 levels left, the output level and the result level, and we have 2 pitfalls for each of these. We, I think, dive into the next level, the output level. And the first example is here on the slide right away. We can see that in this case, a project has chosen the indicator, strategies, and action plans jointly developed, the output indicator. What we can see in the description, especially the 3rd line there, we can see that they are developing action plans for a pilot intervention for the 7 cities that are involved in the project. This is actually a mistake, because outputs cannot be counted if they are for internal use. So for example, a plan for example, a pilot that will be carried out in the next work package. Rather, outputs must always have the purpose to go beyond. Why is that? Outputs always go hand in hand with result indicators. And result indicators have the idea of uptake in organizations that are not part of your project. So it's about long-term view, it's about uptake in the future by others. So it should bring a benefit to organizations outside of your partnership. And I think that's it for this one.
Maybe just a question. That was very clear. Thank you, Jenny. But you've been talking about action plans for, let's say, pilots that would be carried out in another work package.
Yes.
And because this can be considered as an output, in case applicants, they want to have those action plans, where should they put them in the application?
It's a good question. And of course, we also see that quite often, that you come up with a plan, an internal plan for something that you will do at some point during your project implementation. And there is actually an easy answer for this. Because these internal plans, I would argue, like an action plan for a pilot intervention, they would qualify as an activity that you can then quantify with a deliverable, either, let's say, report, because it's something in written, or maybe also other. That really depends on your internal setup and your individual projects, definitely. However, no matter if you choose report or other, make sure that the description is clear enough to support that deliverable that you have chosen. So maybe, since it was a really good question, to conclude here, because it's a little bit confusing with all these written documents that you have. There are 2 ways forward. Either a written document qualifies as an activity with the deliverable report or other, as I have just mentioned for this example, or you move on to the next level, the output level, and you label them as strategy action plan. However, when we reach that output level, we should keep in mind that it's always about this going beyond internal affairs concept. I think that's important, because outputs are connected to results, and results are about the uptake of something that you have developed in your project by someone else outside of your partnership. I hope that has clarified some things. If not, put your question into Slido, please.
Thank you for that, Jenny. Bit heavy on content, but it is what it is. The good news is that this is the last example for the output level. So here we can see that the output that have been selected is pilot actions developed jointly and implemented in projects. However, when we look at the description, we can see that it is actually an analysis that is foreseen. Here, the important thing to keep in mind is that an analysis does not qualify as an output. This is a good activity, maybe a very needed one, but it is not an output. So it should be listed in your list of activities. And it's important when you are working on your application and when you're reaching this output level, to maybe have a quick look at our fact sheet 22, because this is where we have defined outputs in the frame of our program. Obviously, right now, you don't have the time to go on the website, open the fact sheet and look at this definitions. So this is why I'm just gonna repeat them very briefly. So by a pilot, we mean actually a practical measure that you will implement during your project in order to test or to demonstrate a novel solution. So practical measure, novel solution. A strategy is a guidance that sets the general direction in a decided topic in order to achieve a desired goal in the future. So yeah, a guidance towards something. And then if we talk about action plan, it's actually a step further regarding towards, the actual or physical implementation of this strategy. So this is how we define those outputs. And it's always a good idea to look at the fact sheet 22, just to be sure that what you are selecting is actually aligned with our definition.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe if I may add, you have now used the example of analysis, but it can be anything else. This is supposed to be an example for something that has been labeled as an output, but is actually not. And trust us, we have seen many creative things listed as either a pilot or a strategy action plan that per definition in fact sheet 22 doesn't qualify as a real output in our program. What we therefore would recommend, I think, is that you, after this webinar, go to your own application form and go to all the things you have listed as an output, either a pilot or a strategy action plan, and check against the definition that we have in the fact sheet to make sure that everything you put in there really qualifies as a real output in our program. I think that's the good advice that we have at this point.
I think so too.
Cool. I think with that being said, we can breathe and then move to the last level where we have again 2 pitfalls for you. And the first one is actually based on something that we have just talked about. Fact sheet number 22, definitions of indicators. I now want to focus on the definition of the result indicators. In the fact sheet, it asks us to count the number of solutions or strategies, action plans being taken up by others, and not how many organizations are taking up our developed solutions or strategies, action plans. Might sound complicated, it is not. I have an example for you to illustrate exactly what I have said. And to be honest, it's such an easy mistake to avoid. So please do me the favor and avoid this kind of mistake in your application form. Going back to the example. In this case, the project has chosen the result indicator, joint strategies and action plans taken up by organizations. In the description, they are talking about around line 3 again here, that the strategies action plans developed in the project will be taken up by 7 partner cities. Therefore, they have chosen the target of 7. And that is not correct, because not the number of organizations that take up solutions or strategies action plans should be counted in here, only the number of solutions or strategies action plans that will be taken up by others. To make it even more simple, I have an example. let's assume you will, in your project, as outputs, overall outputs, come up with 5 joint strategies and action plans. The maximum of strategies action plans that can be taken up by others will then be 5, not more than that. I hope that's clear. You're welcome to go back to Fact 22 or put a question into Slido.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah. And actually, we are moving on quite fast because this is already the last example for the entire webinar. And it's focusing this time on the result indicator linked to the output organizations cooperating across board. So if we look at this example, we can see that the target for the output is similar to the target for the result indicator. Here, it's wrong. Those 2 targets cannot be the same. And it's actually, there's a very easy reason why. It's because in your result indicators, you should also count organizations that are outside your partnership that will increase their institutional capacity. So that's the thing here. You need to be sure to add them. So for the output, it's actually a quite easy process. It's because the target is automatically calculated by our online monitoring system, and it is based on the number of partners you have in your partnership. So great news, you don't have to do anything at all. However, for the result indicator, then you need to work a little bit on it. And a good starting point is to take the target you have for your output and then to add an estimated number of organizations outside your partnership that you think will increase the capacities by, for example, participating in 1 or more activities that you will carry out during the implementation of your project. We realize it is not an easy thing to do because it requires a big jump in the future. This is why here we just want to emphasize on a reasonable estimate for this result indicator. And that's actually a quite natural bridge to a more general comment regarding targets. No matter if we are looking at activities, deliverables, outputs, and results, just be realistic and also just think about if your target will actually be achievable during the lifetime of your projects. That will actually make your life way easier if you have, let's say, a broad idea of what you can achieve during your project. So estimates, being reasonable and realistic. That's the keywords for this last example.
Yeah, even though it's difficult, we know, but this is what we need to see in your application form.
Yeah, and I think you had this example at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it was 1,000 for pilots.
Yeah, exactly.
And great number. However, maybe a bit too ambitious. So it's fine, to be realistic. That's the most important here.
Yeah. Very good point, Marie. So we have reached our last pitfall. So as you can see, there are not too many, I would argue. No, but really to emphasize again, we can see that the applications are really improving. So now it's just a matter of making sure that you're also avoiding the last pitfalls here. And then I think we are all good to go. When Marie and I, we were preparing for this webinar, we thought at the end of all these examples that you get from us, we wanted to come up with a takeaway message for you, with a summary, with a conclusion. It was not easy, but I think at the end, it all comes down to one thing in your application form. And that is that you need to be consistent. What do we mean by that? First of all, you need to, of course, select an appropriate indicator. Marie had the example. If you have a pilot, don't choose strategies, action plans, or vice versa. As easy as that. Then provide descriptions that are as clear as possible and easy to understand for someone else who needs to read your application form, And of course, there needs to be a very clear link to the indicator you have chosen. Then last but not least, and Marie has emphasized this, decide, hopefully with the whole team, on reasonable target estimates that are, of course, achievable during the lifetime of your project. And we hope that this will help you when you now go back to your application form. So keep these things in mind when you continue to work on your application forms.
Yeah. And of course, just keep in mind that all of that should be aligned with the content of our Factsheet 22. If you cannot find it on our website, we have included the link here. And also we have actually had quite many tutorials on indicator and intervention logic. Here you have the link to one of them, but we think it could be a good idea to maybe, watch it again, maybe if you already joined, and it's just because the setup of this online tutorial was slightly different from what we are doing today. So you get extra information, let's say. Yeah, but here actually the time for your questions. So here again, we have the access to Slido. We also maybe just wanted to remind you that we are unfortunately time limited today. So in case you still have questions after this webinar, feel free to contact the national contact points, because they can provide you with feedback up until the submission deadline for course 3, which is June 30. You can also decide to contact project advisors. We are a team, not only Jenny and I, but even more talented people in the office. So here you don't have the same time for it, because we can only provide feedback up until next Friday.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think we will just change slightly screen so that you can see the questions as well. Just bear with us. And one is already there. I hope you can all see the screen. Yes, normally should be the case.
So we have the first question.
Yeah.
And it states, can there be multiple output indicators per work package? And there is a clear answer.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it can be more than one output indicator per work package. It can be that you have, for example, 2 pilot entries. You can have 2 strategy action plans entries. You can have 1 pilot, 1 strategy action plan. It really depends on your individual project. Just make sure that it makes sense. So you need to have activities in your work package that will really lead to the outputs that you then list. But you can have more than one. We would, however, argue that it should be a reasonable amount, right?
Exactly. But it's not an issue at all to mix, to have like a pilot, strategy and action plan, several strategies and action plans, several different pilots, if they're not the same. So it's all fine. But again, we are using the usual words, being realistic in that sense.
I do, however, have one more comment about this. And if you now plan to have, let's say, 7 pilots in a work package, which is already quite high, but it might happen. You're welcome to combine them in one entry. So you have then the output indicator pilots developed jointly. Then you list in the description, we are going to have 7 pilots in the form of A, this one, B, this one, C, this one. And then you have the target of 7. That's also an option. That really depends on the setup of your project. If it can be combined, if it makes sense, if it's completely different. But just as an additional comment.
And always remember to describe those like pilots, for instance, especially if you are like putting different ones in the same, let's say, box, just to explain this pilot will be on that, being done like that. This is the implementation, so that it's also clear.
The character, there are character limits. You have to mention that, but still describe as well as possible to the degree you can. Good.
Yeah.
That was the first question. Do we have more? Yes, we have.
Yeah. So I think we can just take the three of them and going one by one.
Yeah. So the question is then about deliverables, outputs, and results.
Exactly.
What's the difference?
Yeah. So when talking about deliverables, you are here at the level of your list of activities. So this is how you quantify your activity. I think we had the first example, for instance, where it was we're going to do a pilot evaluation. That was the activity. And then the deliverables that was chosen, what is the tangible thing you have from it? Could have been a report, because based on this description, they were saying that the pilot evaluation will lead to the drafting of a report to explain the pilot. So the deliverables are linked to an activity, they quantify it.
Yes.
And you have this drop-down menu. Then we go to the output, which is another level. And I think, Jenny, you've been mentioning at the beginning of the webinar, like the logical sequence of that. So the idea is that all of your activities, they will be implemented. And through the implementation, they will lead to those outputs. And those outputs are of two kinds. Either you have a pilot or you have a strategy. But in order to have them, you need to carry out some of the activities. And then those outputs, they're kind of like an answer to your work package specific objective. And the result here, we are going to the final level, which is more on the take-up of those outputs. So for the case of pilots, let's say, we are talking about, I think it's solution being taken up.
Yes. Correct.
And then for strategies and action plan, it's like those strategies and action plan that will also be used and implemented, like
taken up
again. Yeah. But it's the result, as I think, as you said, is going outside the scope of your partnership. It's not like partnership business somehow. It's going beyond that. It's something that will benefit more people, more stakeholders.
Yeah. Exactly. So it goes from one to the other. You do something hands-on that will lead to an output, and on an overall level, it will lead to the result of your whole project delivery. We hope that this is clear. If not, you're very welcome to put another question into Slido so that we can follow up on it at a later point.
Yeah,
good. Next one. For activity deliverables, do we need to break down the implementation steps of a pilot as separate activities? Or can we group them together into one activity? The diplomatic answer is it depends. First thing, the actual implementation of a pilot doesn't count as activity deliverable. As Marie said, the actual pilot implementation is always, there's no exception, it's always an output. Everything around the implementation of your pilot can then be qualified as activity deliverable. That can be, what did you say?
Preparation
activities,
data collection, if you need some events to gather some knowledge, or all these type of things. So this was like more what's coming before the implementation of your pilot. And then we have also another stage, what's coming after your pilot implementation. And I think we've seen a lot in the applicants decided to actually evaluate the pilot, which is actually a very sensible choice. So again, those list of activities, as Jenny said, they are only related to something before or after implementation. But the implementation stage is outside the list of activities.
And how you put these examples in that Marie has mentioned, so everything around the implementation of your pilot, that is up to you. You can put them in step by step, preparation before, preparation after, not preparation afterwards, but what you have to do afterward, that's what you can do. But you also can group them. That's also a possibility. Then we would suggest to use the deliverable other. It really depends on how complex it is what you want to do. But there's also the possibility that you don't list each and every step. I mean, this is just something that helps you later on. The more you have, not the more you have, but what you have in your application form, that is something you have to report on later on when you implement your project. So you have to say, okay, we have done this and we have done that. That will also help your whole project consortium to really do what you have said you will do per work package. But you do not necessarily need to list all nitty-gritties of what you're going to do around the pilot implementation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also aligned with sometimes the guidance we are providing, like what is, how many activities can I have in my work package? Yeah. Of course, there is no minimum of maximum, but we expect something around 7, 10.
Yeah.
That would be like, could be 5 sometime, but like that, it's enough to detail a little bit what you're gonna do so that it's also understandable for the reader to see, okay, this output will come from that. But as Jenny said, not going through the very tiny detail.
Nitty-gritties, yeah. Exactly. Very good questions so far. Do we have more? Can a digital platform be defined as an output?
Well, I think the first thing would be to know which output, first of all, are we talking about here? If someone made this choice, are we talking about strategy action plans or pilots? Yeah. So I think the point to remember here is like, is this aligned with the definitions we have? And I think it's a bit tricky when we don't have the context of this digital platform. Are we talking here digital platform as a novel solution, something that's never been done before, that you're going to test, try out, demonstrate?
Yeah. It's really tricky, that question. It's a good question though, because those are the questions you have. I would argue that a digital platform as such doesn't qualify as an output, because you don't have a solution necessarily that will be taken up by others. It depends so much, as you said, Marie, on the whole setup. So it also depends which priority you are applying in. That also makes a difference. In, for example, a priority 3 project, this would clearly be an activity and not an output. In priority 1, it could maybe qualify as an output, but I would suggest that you contact our colleagues, Katharina and Femke. They are the experts on priority 1. So hopefully they will have a good answer for you when they also see the outline and the overall objective, what you want to do, the setup basically.
And I think what is important here to point is like when we just read digital platforms without the description of it, it's difficult to assess. This is why we also put so much emphasis today during the webinar on the importance of having clear descriptions, because this makes us able to fully grasp what you mean by that.
Yeah. Good. Then I think I feel a bit sorry because we can't really give you the answer to your question. So please, as I said, contact our colleagues and we will move on with the next question. Yeah. Is, for example, one social media post, very good question, one communication initiative deliverable, or is the communication initiative a combination of communication outings? So I would argue that one social media post doesn't count as one. I mean, in general, the social media activities would qualify as a communication initiative because this is what you do. But not one post as such will count as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. This is something you would then describe. So you would say, we are doing social media posts, we are going to do flyers, and we are going to do a third thing. that would result in 3 communication initiatives. And then you could describe, we will have social media accounts on, for example, LinkedIn and Facebook, and I don't know what. Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think it's important here in terms of communication to understand the 2 levels we have. So in here, it's only relevant if we are talking about a full application. In all of your work package, you need to define a communication objective, and then you need to list activities needed to achieve this communication objective. If we talk here about just social media posts or using social media throughout the entire lifetime of your project, here we're talking about what is needed in terms of communication at the overall project level. So it's important, let's say, if this use of social media is not only relevant to the achievement of your communication objective in this work package, but more for the overall project, then you should indicate that in the section C8, maybe. It's entitled communication, where here you need to explain what you're going to do at your project level. So again, here, based on what we have, it's just for you to remember the different levels.
Yeah. And before we move on, I want to make yet another comment about this good question. It's good that you are mentioning these things in your application form, either as I have said, as an activity deliverable, or as Marie has mentioned, under the respective text box where it deals with communication aspects that you will have in your project. I would, however, like to highlight that these things are good, but when we're looking at communication initiatives, then it is desirable if you have something on top of this, not only the social media post, but something bigger than that, something more meaningful. I can just maybe give you an example that you know what I mean. So it's always the idea that these communication initiatives, they will lead to something. And a social media post, yes, it might lead to some attention for your project, but you need to think about something. How can you involve in your communication initiatives the right target groups and the right stakeholders to achieve something with your project in the end? So we have this Partridge project, for example. They are having farm walks where they're inviting politicians and all sorts of relevant stakeholders to see what is being done in the project, to convince them that they have come up with good solutions that need to be taken up on a different level, policy level, so that something will change. So when looking at these communication initiatives, of course, social media posts are important, but also think about something bigger than that. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something else.
Capitalization strategy, part of C7. So that's C7. Plus specific activities, deliverables, communication, external events. The developing itself, part of work package 1, activity output. I think what's important here is like already when we are looking at work package 1 and section C7, we are not at the same level. If we talk about capitalization strategy as part of an activity to answer your communication objective in your work package, that would be listed there. But if you talk about something that is for your entire project, all work packages together, then this is to be developed in this section C7. Like when we talk about, for example, if you have a communication strategy as well. If it's here, it's just to see what's the scope of this capitalization strategy. Is it to answer the need in work package, or is it at your overall project level? The important thing is that it's actually interesting, this question, because we're also talking about double counting here. What you're writing, let's say, in the section C7 on communication shouldn't appear in your list of activities and vice versa, because we are not talking about the same levels here. We have the work package levels and we have the overall project level. Yeah, that's how I understood the question.
Yeah, I had difficulties to understand the question, but now with your answer, it makes sense. So hopefully the person who has posted the question is also satisfied.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. What process do you propose to align red thread the logic from program priorities to actually linking results to project objective? Very good question as well. There are different ways of doing it, right? Of course, you need to go through the different building blocks through your overall objective, work package objectives, activities, outputs, results. And you can always make these cross checks. So when you look at your, let's take one example. You look at the activities. Then you ask yourself, do I really need these activities in order to reach my work package objective? And do all these activities listed, do they actually lead to my output that I have listed here for this work package? So this is something you can do yourself. I do, however, also recommend, and that sounds a bit strange maybe, but to give your application form to someone else who has not seen the application form before and who has not heard about the topic maybe. It can be your mom, for example, because this person will see if there are mismatches between the different building blocks. That would be my take on it. Do you have a tip, Molly?
No, I think what could be interesting as well regarding, I think, the program priorities, in case people are in doubt, to look at our program document where it's clearly explained, like examples of actions, or okay, let's say if you're in priority 2.5 on circularity, okay, what do we mean by that? What are the type of actions we are maybe expecting? So you can already, let's say, figure out from your project idea where you stand there. Are you answering this type of alternatives or examples we have provided at program level? And then, of course, as you said, Jenny, then when working on your project, making sure that everything is kind of flowing logically. But yeah, that was just my take on program priorities, because we have a bit more descriptions there in case it's needed.
Very good, because I didn't touch upon this. The program level, that's there as well, and you're entirely correct. We have, however, decided to really focus on the project level. That's why very good that you have answered it. So we have reached the 11 o'clock. That means that officially our webinar is over. I can hear that we have one more question. So I think we will take that question. For the ones of you that can stay, please stay. If you have to leave, thank you for being with us today, and we hope this webinar has helped you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Some example of good output definitions would help.
Some examples of good output definitions. Well, I mean, we have the definition of what an output should be in our fact sheet, right? So you should go to this. The definitions that you have to come up yourself, they are so individual that I would argue there's no way that we can provide you with an example, because as we have said, you need to choose an indicator, let's say a pilot, and then you come up with your definition of what in your case this pilot will look like. And that's so individual that I would argue it's difficult.
It's hard, exactly. But is it in terms of an example of what could be a pilot, or what could be a strategy and action plan? That again, it's really dependent on the topic of your project, but
it can be everything and nothing, to be honest. I would suggest before we just shoot with some examples, as you said, it's also priority, like different from priority to priority. We would suggest, I think, to reach out to your project advisor or to someone at the Secretariat or the NCPs to really go into more details when it comes to your question here. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's it. Really good questions. And we hope really that you will be able, by back to your application form and be clear about all these things. And then we will see applications without these mistakes.
Exactly.
Thanks for being with us today.
And have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.